The click of the front door latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't a slam. There was no anger in it, no theatricality. It was a simple, mechanical sound. A deadbolt sliding into place, a tumbler turning. A final, definitive sound that separated my life into two distinct parts, before and after. I stood in the hallway of our apartment, the one we had shared for 3 years, and listened to the silence that rushed in to fill the space my wife used to occupy. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It pressed in on my ears, filled my lungs. Just moments ago, this space had been filled with the frantic sounds of her packing the zip of a suitcase, the rustle of clothes, the sharp, tearless sobs of a woman whose heart had been turned to stone. Now there was nothing. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant drone of traffic from the street below. But in here, in our home, there was only the sound of absence. My eyes drifted to the empty space by the door where her large black suitcase had been. I could still see the impression it left in the carpet fibers, a perfect rectangle of what was no longer there. My gaze then fell to my phone, clutched in my hand. The screen was lit up, displaying the crypto exchange app that had become my obsession, and on the screen, a number that had burned itself onto the back of my eyelids, a balance of $0 and 0 cents. A perfect, round, unforgiving number. The digital tombstone for $75,000. It wasn't my money. That was the sickest part. It was a gift from my parents, a lifeline. The culmination of their hopes for me, a physical manifestation of their love. And I had set it on fire. Her final words echoed in the crushing silence. She hadn't screamed them. She had spoken with a chilling calmness, her eyes as cold and distant as a winter sky. Standing there, her hand on the handle of her suitcase, she looked through me at the ruin I had created. It was your parents' money, Alexander. She had said, her voice flat, devoid of the warmth I had known for years. It was their dream for us. You broke it. You have to be the one to tell them. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut and my world ended. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot in the hallway. My wife, the woman I had promised to build a life with, was gone. The future we had mapped out, the little house, with the yard, the room we'd paint for a nursery, was erased. That alone felt like a crushing weight. But then there was the other, the impending phone call. The conversation felt more terrifying than facing a firing squad. How do you tell your parents who had worked their whole lives to give you such a staggering gift that you had gambled it all away, that their $75,000, the money for our first home, had vanished into the digital ether because of my greed? My mind reeled back a month. I saw us all so clearly sitting around my parents' kitchen table. My mom, her eyes shining, slid an envelope across the polished wood. My dad sat beside her, a quiet, proud smile on his face. He was looking at me, his 32-year-old son, and seeing the life he had always wanted for me, finally coming into focus. Inside was a cashier's check. My wife and I looked at it then, at each other, our jaws on the floor. $75,000. For the house, my mom had said, her voice thick with emotion, we want you to have a good start. My wife had cried, hugging them both tightly, promising we would find the perfect place and make them proud. I remember feeling a surge of something powerful that day. It was more than gratitude. It was a sense of responsibility, a feeling that I was finally on the right track. I held that check like it was a sacred artifact, the key to everything we wanted. We deposited it the next day. For weeks, we'd look at the balance on our banking app, just marveling at it. We spent evenings scrolling through real estate listings, playfully arguing about backyard sizes and kitchen layouts. It was the happiest we had been in a long time. The dream was right there. And then I got the tip. It came from a guy at work who was always talking about crypto, about moonshots and sure things. He showed me charts, talked about the technology, and called one particular digital asset the next internet. The idea took root in my mind like a poison vine. Why just buy a starter home? Why not turn $75,000 into $300,000? We could buy our dream house outright. No mortgage. I wasn't being greedy, I told myself. I was being smart, a provider. So 1 week ago, while my wife was at work, I did it. I wanted it to be the greatest surprise of her life. I logged into our joint account, my heart hammering with a mix of terror and exhilaration, and initiated the transfer, the entire $75,000, from the safety of our bank to the wild west of a high-risk exchange. When it was done, I felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. I was a genius. For a few days, I was. The asset went up. I would refresh the app 100 times a day, watching the number climb, fantasizing about the look on my wife's face when I showed her. I imagined telling my dad I'd quadrupled his investment. Then 24 hours ago, the collapse began. It started as a dip, a healthy correction, the forum said. Then it fell faster. The red numbers on the screen grew more menacing. Panic set in. The forums turned from bravado to terror. People were talking about a rug pull, about developers vanishing. The price was in free fall. I watched helpless as our future dissolved in real time. $10,000 lost, then 20, then 50. In the space of a few hours, $75,000 became zero. I sat there all night staring at the screen, hoping for a miracle that never came. Confessing to my wife this morning was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief, then to a dawning horror, and finally to a cold, hard rage I had never seen. The anger quickly burned out, leaving only the ash of betrayal. "You did what?" she whispered. "You took your parents' money, our house money, and you gambled it." I tried to explain my intentions, but the words sounded hollow and pathetic even to me. She just shook her head, a single tear of disgust rolling down her cheek, and then she started packing. Now standing alone in the deafening silence, her final words are my sentence. "You have to be the one to tell them." She was right. This was my mess. I had not only destroyed our marriage, but also betrayed the trust of the two people who gave me everything. The door was closed, and I had no idea how to open another one ever again. The sound of the engine faded first, a low rumble shrinking into a faint hum, and then nothing. Just the whisper of the wind against the window pane and the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my eyes fixed on the front door. It was just a door, a slab of wood with a brass handle, but an hour ago it was part of a home. Now it was a tombstone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, filled the spaces where her laughter used to be, where the sound of her keys in the lock was the punctuation mark at the end of my day. I could almost feel the weight of the air change, becoming thin and sharp, like the atmosphere on a dead planet. I took a breath, and it felt like inhaling dust. I looked down at my phone, still clutched in my hand. The screen was black, but I didn't need to see it. The image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. That crypto app. The graph that looked like a skyline of a vibrant city one day and a flat line the next. Below it, the stark, brutal numbers, balance 0.0. It was the most absolute, the most final zero I had ever seen. It wasn't just an absence of money, it was an anti-money, a black hole where a future used to be. My gaze drifted around the room. Everything was the same, but completely different. The throw blanket she loved was still folded over the arm of the couch. The two coffee mugs, one with a chip on the rim that was hers, sat by the sink. A magazine she'd been reading was face down on the end table, saving her page. They were like artifacts from a lost civilization, evidence of a life that had existed here just this morning, a life I had single-handedly, catastrophically annihilated. Her last words echoed in the silence, replaying on a merciless loop. "You have to be the one to tell them." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, a final parting burden she had placed squarely on my shoulders before walking out of my life. And she was right. Of course she was right. It wasn't our money I had lost. We had saved, yes, but our savings were a tiny stream next to the river my parents had diverted into our lives. $75,000. It was their money, their hard work, their careful planning, their belief in me. I hadn't just gambled away a house deposit, I had set a torch to a monument they had built in my honor. The thought of that conversation was paralyzing. It wasn't a conversation, it was a confession, a verdict. How do you even start? Hi, Mom, Dad. Remember that incredible life-changing gift you gave me, the one that represented your faith in my future? Well, I have some hilarious news. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. For the next few hours, I just drifted. I was a ghost in my own house. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, stared at its contents without seeing a thing, and then closed the door. I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of our bedroom. The indentation of her head was still on her pillow. Her scent, a faint mix of her shampoo, and something uniquely her, still hung in the air. I backed away as if the room was on fire. Every object was an accusation. The real estate brochures on the counter, the paint samples we'd been looking at for a hypothetical nursery. Each one was a tiny, sharp reminder of the specific future I had stolen from us. I was 32 years old. I was supposed to be a husband, a future father, a responsible man building a life. Instead, I was a fool who had chased a digital ghost off a cliff, dragging his entire world down with him. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I eventually collapsed onto the couch, the same couch where we'd sat with my parents a month ago. I could still see my dad, his eyes shining with pride, handing me the check. "This is for you both," he'd said. "Build something good." I had promised him I would. I had looked him in the eye and promised. My phone had been silent all day. I'd half expected, half prayed for a text from my wife. Something angry, something hateful, anything. Just to know she was still connected to this reality that I hadn't just dreamed the whole horrible morning. But there was nothing. The silence from her was as absolute as the silence in the house. And then late in the afternoon, as the sun began to cast long, sorrowful shadows across the floor, the phone buzzed. It vibrated against the wooden coffee table with a sound that was unnaturally loud, a jarring intrusion into the suffocating quiet. My head snapped up. My heart gave a painful lurch. For one insane, stupid second, I thought it was her. Hope that cruel, idiotic traitor flared in my chest. Maybe she'd cooled down. Maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe she was coming home. I snatched the phone, my thumb fumbling with the screen. But it wasn't her name that lit up the display. It was Mom. And beneath her name was the preview of a message. 6 innocent, loving, catastrophic words. The text read, "Hi, honey, just checking in. Any exciting news on the house hunt? We're so excited for you both." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into instruments of torture. Each one was a perfectly calibrated strike against my shattered nerves. Hi, honey. The casual, unconditional love I felt I no longer deserved. A greeting from a world where I was still her son, not a failure who had betrayed her trust. Just checking in. The simple maternal act of care that now felt like the opening volley of an interrogation. She was looking for her son, and he was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out shell of guilt. Any exciting news on the house hunt? The question was a white-hot poker. Oh, I had news all right. But it wasn't exciting. It was world-ending. The house hunt was over. The house was a crater. The dream was a pile of ash. And then the final devastating blow. "We're so excited for you both." You both. That phrase broke something deep inside me. It was a snapshot of a reality that no longer existed, a reality where my wife and I were a team, a unit, a both. A world where my parents' excitement was justified. The text wasn't just a question, it was a confirmation of everything I had just lost. It was a cheerful, smiling photograph of the life I had destroyed that morning. My breath hitched. The room started to spin. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't some abstract dread anymore, some future problem I could push away. This was it. The moment was here. The lie had to begin now, or the truth had to come out. There was no middle ground. I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard, completely paralyzed. What could I possibly type? "Hey Mom, things are great." The lie felt like poison on my tongue. "Mom, I need to tell you something." The truth felt like a cliff I was about to throw myself off. My mother's text was a trigger. It was the starting pistol for a race I could never win. It took the formless, shapeless cloud of my guilt and condensed it into a single, sharp, unbearable point of pressure. My wife leaving was the explosion. This text was the shock wave, the one that collapses all the buildings left standing. My heart was pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of panic. I thought about her, my mom, on the other end of that line, probably sitting in her kitchen, smiling, thinking about her son and his wife, imagining grandchildren on a lawn we would never own. Her innocence, her hope. It was the cruelest part of all. I was about to destroy that. I was about to break her heart and my dad's with my own stupidity and greed. I couldn't do it. Not like this. Not in a text. With a trembling hand, I set the phone face down on the table. I didn't reply. I just let the message sit there unanswered, a glowing, toxic beacon in the darkness of my living room. The lie of omission had officially begun. Every second that ticked by was another brick in the wall I was building between them and the truth. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the longer I waited, the higher the wall would get, and the more devastating it would be when it finally came crashing down. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in self-torture. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I just paced the silent rooms of my home, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. Every few minutes my hand would twitch and I'd pick up my phone. I'd open the crypto exchange app as if by some miracle the screen would show something other than that brutal mocking number 0. It never did. It was a digital tombstone, and I was the mourner who couldn't look away. I drafted and deleted dozens of messages to my parents. They started with apologies. "Mom, Dad, I am so sorry, but something terrible has happened." Too weak. They moved to panicked explanations. There was a market crash. It was unforeseen. I thought I was doing the right thing. Too many excuses. I even tried to bargain with a God I didn't believe in, typing out sentences that promised I would make it right, that I had a plan, even though I had nothing. Each draft was a lie. Each deleted message was an act of cowardice. Then the call started. My mom's ringtone, a cheerful little tune that had always made me smile, now sounded like an air raid siren. I'd watch her picture pop up on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I'd let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text would follow. "Just wanted to hear your voice. Call me back when you can." The casual love was like acid. The next day, the tone shifted. The cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a subtle, creeping anxiety. "Is everything okay, Alex? We haven't heard from you. Is your wife okay?" That last question twisted the knife. They were asking about a person who wasn't here. They were inquiring about the health of a marriage that was dead on arrival, and I was the one who had signed the death certificate. I'd send back a vague, pathetic reply. "Hey, sorry, super busy with work. All good here." Every word I typed felt like I was swallowing glass. The pressure kept building, a slow, crushing weight. I felt like I was trapped at the bottom of the ocean, and every unanswered call, every deflected text was another ton of water being piled on top of me. I knew I couldn't hide forever. The lie was growing, becoming a living thing in my house, its shadow stretching into every empty room. The breaking point came on the third day. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, but this time it was my dad. I let it ring. I counted the rings 1, 2, 3, 4 before it finally fell silent. A moment later, the voicemail notification appeared. I knew I had to listen. Ignoring my dad was different. His silence was always heavier than my mom's words. I pressed play, and his voice filled the room, steady and serious, but laced with an unmistakable thread of worry. "Son, call me. Your mother is worried sick, and frankly, so am I. We're your parents. If something is wrong, you need to tell us. This isn't like you." He paused, and in that brief silence, I could hear a world of disappointment. "Whatever it is, stop hiding from it. Call me." The voicemail ended. I stood there, phone in my hand, the silence of the room rushing back in to replace his voice. He was right. My silence wasn't protecting them. It was hurting them. My cowardice was making them imagine scenarios that were probably even worse than the truth. I had turned their gift of love and support into a source of anxiety and fear. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't hide. The wall had to come down. Now. I didn't call back. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and got in my car. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to say it to their faces. They deserved that much. The drive to my parents' house was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Every landmark was a memory. The park where my dad taught me to throw a baseball, the corner store where my mom would buy me candy after school. It was a tour of a life they had given me, a life I had just set on fire. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I walked to the front door and rang the bell before I could lose my nerve. My mom opened it, and the look of relief on her face was instantly replaced by deep concern. "Alexander." "Oh, thank goodness. What's wrong? You look terrible." My dad appeared behind her, his expression grim. "Come in, son." They led me to the kitchen, the heart of their home. They sat me down at the round oak table, the same table where we'd had 1,000 family dinners, the same table where they had probably sat just 1 month ago, deciding to give me that $75,000, talking about my future with pride in their voices. My mom put a glass of water in front of me. "Where's your wife?" she asked softly. "Is she all right?" And that was it. The dam broke. I looked from my mother's worried face to my father's stoic, waiting gaze, and I just crumbled. The words came out in a torrent of shame. "She's gone." I started, my voice cracking. "She left me." My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad just watched me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's my fault," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It's all my fault. The house deposit, the money you gave us, it's gone." I forced myself to meet my father's eyes. "I took it out of our joint account. I didn't tell her. I put it into a cryptocurrency investment. I thought it was a sure thing. I thought I could double it, that I could surprise you both, buy a bigger house. I was so stupid and so greedy." I paused, taking a ragged breath. "The market crashed 2 days ago. It's all gone. Every single cent. $75,000. It's worth zero." I laid it all out. The unilateral transfer, the lie to my wife, the catastrophic loss. I confessed everything. When I finished, I just stared down at my hands on the table, waiting for the explosion, for the yelling, the anger, the recriminations. But it never came. Instead, there was only silence, a heavy, profound silence that was 1,000 times worse than any shouting match could ever be. I finally dared to look up. My mother was openly weeping, but silently tears just streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at a spot on the wall, as if she was seeing a future she had imagined for me just vanish into thin air. But it was my father's expression that destroyed me. There was no anger in his eyes. There was just nothing. A complete and total absence of the pride he used to look at me with. It was gone. In its place was a deep, soul-crushing disappointment. He looked at me not like his son, but like a stranger he didn't understand. A failed investment. A bad bet. He just shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and then he looked away. That silence, that look from my father, that was the real bottom. The money was gone. My wife was gone. And in that moment, I understood that I had lost something far more valuable. I had shattered their trust. I had incinerated their respect. The drive back to my empty house was a blur. The weight of what I had done was suffocating. I had managed to ruin every important relationship in my life in the span of 1 week. I walked into the house, and the silence that greeted me was no longer just the absence of my wife. It was the sound of my own isolation. I was 32 years old, financially destitute, alone, and utterly broken by my own hand. I spent that night wide awake, staring at the ceiling. There were no more excuses, no one else to blame. The market didn't do this to me. My wife didn't do this to me. I did this. My arrogance, my greed, my betrayal of the people who loved me. I had to face the man in the mirror, and for the first time I saw him clearly. He was a coward and a fool, and I hated him. I lay there until the sun came up, letting the full, horrifying weight of my failure crush me. I had to feel it all. I had to hit the absolute bedrock of rock bottom, because only then could I even think about trying to climb back up. The next morning, something shifted. The despair was still there, a cold, heavy lump in my gut, but it was now joined by something else, a sliver of resolve. This couldn't be the end of my story. I couldn't let my legacy be this one catastrophic failure. The victory wasn't going to be about getting the money back. The victory had to be about rebuilding my integrity. I got to work. I went through my apartment and made a list of everything I owned that had any real value. My car, a sports sedan I'd been so proud of, gone. I listed it for sale that morning. My collection of expensive watches, my top-of-the-line gaming computer, my designer clothes. I took pictures of everything and posted them online. It was a fire sale of my former life, and with every item I listed, I felt a little bit of the weight lift. These things were just anchors tying me to the man I used to be. For the next week, I liquidated my life. I sold the car for less than it was worth because I needed the cash now. I met strangers in parking lots to sell off my electronics. I took a box of my old life to a pawn shop. It was humiliating, but it was necessary. When it was all done, I sat down with a pen and paper. I created a budget so strict it made my eyes water. I calculated how much I could set aside every single month. It wasn't much not compared to the mountain of debt I owed my parents in both money and trust. I created a spreadsheet, a detailed long-term repayment plan that stretched out for years, maybe even a decade. Then I picked up the phone. I called my dad. He answered on the second ring, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Hello?" I took a deep breath. "Dad, it's me. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm calling to tell you my plan." I laid it all out for him. The sale of my car, my possessions, the exact amount of money I had raised so far, the brutally honest monthly budget I had created. I told him the exact date of every month that I would be making a payment to them and for how much. "It's going to take a long time." I finished my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "But I am going to pay back every single cent of that $75,000. I swear it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I expected him to say it wasn't enough or to just hang up. But then I heard him clear his throat. "Okay, son," he said. And for the first time, I heard a flicker of something other than disappointment in his voice. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't warmth. But it was something. It was a start. Okay. We hung up. I immediately opened my banking app. I looked at the number I had calculated the first payment on a very long road. I typed in my parents' account information, entered the amount, and pressed send. The confirmation screen popped up. The transfer was complete. It was a pathetically small sum compared to the hole I had dug. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a fix. But it was a promise. It was the first brick I had ever laid down myself on a foundation of my own making. It was the start of me paying my own way, not with their money, but with my own integrity. And as I stared at that screen alone in my empty apartment, I knew the road ahead was long. But for the first time since that door closed behind my wife, I was finally facing the right direction.